Video 3, let's begin. On this equation, they want us to to graph. And of course, it's in function form, so y is already by itself. All we need to do is go to an input-output table, an XY table, plug in some easy numbers, most of the time 0, 1, and 2. But in this case, because we have a fraction in front of x, let's for sure use 0, because when you plug in a 0 right here, anything times 0 is 0. And then 0 plus 3, that will be the output, 3. So 0, 3 is a coordinate. Now, what other number would be nice to plug in to the x value? When you have a fraction in front of it, it would be nice to plug in the denominator of that fraction, because when you multiply a fraction by its denominator, right there, it'll cancel out. So let's plug in a 2. Okay, when we plug in a 2 right there, the 2's eliminate, and what do I have left? I have a negative 3 plus 3, which is 0. So just with those two coordinates, I could identify my answer. Let me just do a quick sketch here. If it crosses, or go to the location 0, 3. 0 on the x, okay, so you don't go anywhere on the x, and you go 3 on the y. 1, 2, 3, that would be this coordinate up here. There's 0, 3. And now the other one reads 2, 0. 2 on the x and 0 on the y. So we do know that this line looks like that, crossing the y-axis at 3, crossing the x-axis at 2. And if we look for that, we will see that this is the only line that has the x-intercept at 2 and the y-intercept at 3. And we didn't do that by setting x equal to 0 or y equal to 0. We did that by making an input-output table and plugging in the easy number 0 and whatever denominator we had on that fraction. Okay, so I hope this helps. I hope you understand that. This is the correct answer. Let's move on. Now on this one, we do have a standard form equation, ax plus by equals c. Of course, a is positive 1, b is negative 1, and c is 2. And it's really easy to graph standard form equations if you think about the x-intercept and the y-intercept. Okay, so how do you find the x-intercept? You set that y equal to 0 and solve. So if you do set y equal to 0 and solve, that's kind of like just covering it up and solving what's left. And what is left? X equals 2. Wow, so we actually have the answer. The x-intercept, x equals 2. That tells you where it crosses the x-axis. If you wanted the actual coordinate, that would be 2 for the x, and of course 0 for y, because we set y equal to 0. So there's my x-intercept. If I wanted to find my y-intercept, how do I do that? Well, I must set x equal to 0 and solve. And setting x equal to 0 is the equivalent of just covering it up and then solving what's left over. So I have negative y equals 2. Of course, you don't want a negative y. So let's divide by negative 1, divide by negative 1, and that will give me y equals negative 2. Y equals negative 2. So now I know where it crosses the x-axis, it crosses at 2, and where it crosses the y-axis at negative 2. And I know exactly what my line looks like. It crosses the x at positive 2, and it crosses my y at negative 2. So x-intercept is right there. Y-intercept is right there. So this is what my line looks like. Okay, and which one is the correct answer? This one would be the correct answer. Okay, let's move on to the next equation. Another standard form equation. So how do we find the x-intercept? We set the y value equal to 0 and solve. How do we find the y-intercept? We set x equal to 0 and solve, okay? So when I say set y equal to 0, here's why. If you put a 0 right there, it's going to cancel out. So it's as simple as this. Setting y equal to 0 is kind of like just covering up the y value. And what do we have left? We have x equals 4. So you just write that, x equals 4, and that is your x-intercept value. Now, if you actually wanted the coordinate, the location, well, your x value is 4, and your y value, we set y equal to 0, so y is 0. How do you find the y-intercept? Well, to find the y-intercept, you set x equal to 0. So here's x, put a 0 right there, and that's pretty much kind of like just covering it up. And what do you have left over? You have 2y equals 4. If you wanted to, you could write that down, 2y equals 4, but you need to solve it. So we're going to divide by 2, divide by 2, your y-intercept is 2. Okay, it crosses the y-axis at 2. Now, what is the exact location of a line that crosses the y-axis at 2? What is that exact location of the y-intercept? Well, your x value is 0, and your y value is 2. Okay, so let's do a quick sketch of this. Actually, we don't have to do a quick sketch of it. We could see it right here. But yeah, this one crosses the x value at 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4 on the x. It crosses right there at 4, 0. And the y-intercept crosses at 2. So the y-axis, it crosses at 2 right there. So your line looks like that, which is this one down here. I apologize for that. Anyways, this is the correct answer, obviously. It crosses the x-axis at 4, crosses the y-axis at 2. There's your line. Okay. Let's rewrite this equation in standard form. Once again, what is standard form? It's capital AX plus capital BY equaling capital C. They're capitalized to help you remember that you don't want fractions or decimals. And of course, you want the x's and the y's on the left side of the equal sign. And you want your constant value, your number without a variable, on the right side of the equal sign. So here's your equation, and right now it's in function form. Y is by itself, but you don't want the y by itself. You want your x's and y's on the left side of the equal sign. So I don't want the negative 2x on the right side of the equal sign. I want it on the left side, so I need to get rid of that minus 2x by adding 2x. And what I do to one side, I do to the other side, adding 2x. Now obviously you can't add y plus 2x, so we're just going to rewrite it. But instead of writing y plus 2x, we want the x term first and the y term second. So I'm going to write 2x with a positive y. So that's 2x with a positive y. And what would be left on the right side of the equal sign? Just the 3. So on the right side of the equal sign, it's just 3. And of course, to get full credit, you need to type this standard form equation with no spaces between your term. 2x plus y equals 3, no spaces. Hit enter and you'll get full credit on this question 18. On this question, they ask us to select all the true statements. So it says the range of these coordinates 1, 3, 2, 5, 3, 7. The range are the numbers. First of all, let's begin by stating, what does range mean? Range are your outputs. They are your y values. They are your dependent values. Dependent. Okay, so all of those mean the same thing. So the range values of these coordinates are ordered pairs. What are ordered pairs? It's a pair of numbers, x and y, x and y, x and y. So the range is talking about the outputs, the y values. So what are the y values? It's 3, 5, and 7. And it says right here that the range are the numbers 1, 2. No, it's not 1, 2, and 3. Those are the domain values. Those are the x values. The range values are your outputs. So given that this is a practice quiz, remember, I will always switch something on the actual quiz. So maybe instead of range on the actual quiz, it'll be like, what's the domain, right? The domain would be the x value. So the domain would be 1, 2, and 3. But right here it's saying the range values, that should be 3, 5, and 7. And obviously it does not say that. It says 1, 2, and 3. Whoops, you saw the correct answers there. My bad. The outputs, the y values, the range values all mean the same thing. That's true. The range or the outputs, the y values, they all mean the same thing. And they could have even put dependent values, but they didn't. So this is a true statement. That would be a green dot right there. The outputs, the y values, and the range all mean the same thing. Now keep in mind that I might, on the test, maybe change this to x values, which would make this a false statement. So this is a true statement. Let's see if there's any other true statements. It says the range values are the dependent values. That is true, that the range values are the outputs, they are the y values, and they do depend on your inputs. So that's a true statement as well. Whoops, couldn't move that. But anyways, that's a true statement as well. Put a green dot there. And last but not least, the coordinate -5, -6 is a solution for this equation. Well, remember that your x value is -5, your y value is -6. So if you did plug in a -5 right there, that would read -5 minus 1. And if you did plug in a -6 right there for y, that'd be a -6. And of course, you'd have your equal sign right here. So is this a true statement that -6 equals -5 minus 1? Yeah, -6 equals -6. That's a true statement. So this is also a true statement here. So you would select these three, you wouldn't select the first one, and that would be the solution to this problem of selecting all true statements. Let's go to our last question. It says find the y-intercepts of the following equation. Of course, you already see the answer there, but once again, how do you find the y-intercept? To find the y-intercept, you set x equal to 0 and solve. That's what you do. Okay, to find the x-intercept, you set y equal to 0 and solve. To find the y-intercept, you set x equal to 0 and solve. So where's your x at? Your x is right here. So let's actually write it out. 4 times x, but we said we're plugging in a 0. We're plugging in a 0 for x. It says equals 2y minus 8. Okay, so again, 4x equals 2y minus 8. 4x equals 2y minus 8. And we are setting x equal to 0, so there's the x. I put a 0 right there. That is 4 times 0. So what I have here is 0 equals 2y minus 8. So now we need to solve. We need to solve for y. So I have y on the right side of the equal sign. Let's get y by itself, all right? So I'm going to get rid of that minus 8 by doing the opposite, plus 8. What I do to one side, I do to the other side. I will have 8 equaling 2y. Now, to solve for y, to get rid of the multiplication of 2 in front of y, you're going to divide by 2 and divide by 2, giving you your final answer, y equals 4. Okay? And what did we just find here? We found the y-intercept. That's the location of where your line will cross the y-axis, not the x-axis. So in this case, we know that the y-intercept is at 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's going to cross right there. And what is that location? We need to write it as a coordinate, and that's the location 0 on your x, 4 on your y. Now that makes total sense that the x value is 0 and the y value is 4. After all, we did set x equal to 0. So when it comes to a coordinate, the x value, we said that the x value was 0, and we solved to find that the y value was 4. So the y-intercept is 0, 4. There's 0, 4. That's the correct one. We are done.